Welcome, everyone, to Seniors, where real life experience meets real world wisdom for the season of life that matters most. Today's conversation is tender and it's honest. And for many of you listening, it may feel deeply personal. My guest today is Dr. Sarah Vosburgh, psychologist, caregiver, wife, mother, and now author of the forthcoming memoir, Who Will Name the Bees? Sarah never set out to write this book. Like so many of us, her life was already full. Family, profession, responsibility, service. But in the quiet hours of night, memories began to press in, not politely, not conveniently. They insisted. And what emerged is a memoir that asks a question many families living with Alzheimer's have whispered in one way or the other. When memory fades, what remains? In Who Will Name the Bee, Sarah reflects on caring for her mother through Alzheimer's and breast cancer, navigating the maze of medical systems, wrestling with grief that arrives in fragments, and discovering that love is often most visible when it's imperfect. She writes with the precision of a psychologist, the heart of a daughter, and the soul of a poet. A native New Englander, now living in San Diego, Sarah draws from a lifetime of faith, family, and deep introspection. Influenced by the quiet strength of writers like Emily Dickinson, her words are restrained but powerful. Never dramatic for the sake of drama, but honest for the sake of truth. This is not a book that polishes memory into something convenient. It honors the whole story, the contradictions, the misunderstandings, the unspoken love, the questions that linger. For anyone who has watched a parent slowly forget, for anyone who has had to make impossible caregiving decisions, for anyone who has realized sometimes too late the depth of a love that wasn't always easy, this conversation is for you. Sarah reminds us that naming matters, telling the story matters, bearing witness matters. Because when language falters and names are forgotten, connection can still endure. And today we are honored to sit with a woman who chose to name the bees, to remember fully, and to love honestly. Please welcome Dr. Sarah Vosburgh. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure that I recognize the person that you introduced, but thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege to be here.
Well, it's a privilege to talk to you. And as I told you just a few minutes before we got started, the introduction is a little long, but I think it's necessary. And your book was very inspiring to me. And I know that once it's released, and I think the release date is April 22nd, I think there's going to be a lot of people who are also very moved and inspired as well. Sarah, I talked a little about you in the introduction, but what did I leave out? Tell us a little more about you.
Honestly, Jim, that bear witness thing that you just said, it's been such a privilege, truly, to bear witness to memories that other people have, to hear their stories. Um, Obviously, working as a psychologist, I've had the opportunity to bear witness to real growth and development, and that I didn't realize, honestly, and I'm sure that many seniors can relate. I didn't realize how much a part of that was a part of my identity that was until I retired.
Yeah, yeah.
So I am not I talk a lot about my mother's flowers, and I am not the gardener that she was, but we shared music, and I can't live without it.
Yeah.
Um, I can't believe you're making me cry.
Well,
Um,
I understand. It's an emotional story, and you know it's so emotional for so many people. You're not alone. I mean, you wrote beautifully about it. But your story is so many people's story in so many ways. Let me just interrupt you and ask you this, because there were a couple things. I'm not sure what order to ask the questions, but um, I'm curious about the memory facility that your mother went to when you made the decision that it was time. And you described the memory center. And part of what I do with the Senior to Seniors podcast is I talk to a lot of people and I begin to realize things that obviously I wasn't aware of. And your story of the memory center and what you went through in the the non-caring part of it that you talked about. I don't think it is something that people haven't seen before. Tell us about that when you put your mom in the memory center, about how your mother was treated and how you saw it from your end and how you coped with that.
I could not have survived without my husband as far as the coping was concerned. And my mother was second generation Alzheimer's, potentially third generation Alzheimer's, based on the stories that I have about her grandfather. And I did, my grandmother was placed in a facility that was very traditional, something that you would think of as being a nursing home,
Hmm.
that we all, those of us of a certain generation, remember, and probably all visited people there and so on. And I didn't want that for my mother. And I knew that there were other things out there. And so I started visiting different places.
Hmm.
And honestly, I can tell you that the people that worked there were not non-caring. It was just that it was that my mother didn't get the care that I would have given her.
Yeah.
Were she able to stay with me? And to hold them to that standard is not quite fair. But it felt very um, it was very anger producing,
Hmm.
very frustrating. And yet I look back on the facility is still there. I look back on the facility, the way it was designed, the things that they had available, all of that. And it was really quite lovely. My mother should have not gone there. They wanted her there, they thought it was going to work, and it did not.
Yeah. And so, and it made me angry as well. You know, when you described what you went through, what your family went through, what your mother went through. But, it talk about, she didn't behave in the way that they thought she should behave. And I don't know that a lot of people necessarily behave in the way that they need to behave in order to adapt, or for the facility to adapt to them. And they reached out really wanting uh, to to drug her. Am I correct with that? Or
Yes,
sedation? Uh,
yes.
how
Um,
how did that go?
So, in the original facility that she was in, where she started, which I just described to you as lovely, and it was like a little town.
Yeah.
Um, and it was all a maze. So you could never get lost. And there was ice cream to be had in one place, and lovebirds in another place, and a piano down at the end of one hall, and so on and so forth. So where there were lots of things to amuse residents. I don't know that I ever saw them using or doing that when I was there, but there were lots of activities. I did take part in some of the activities with my mom when I would visit her. Um, More often than not, they were in a common room or watching TV or whatever, which was not my mom, for starters. My mother was busy, 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 busy
Yeah.
bee,
Yeah.
always, always, always busy. So it was a lot to ask of her to be quiet and sit
Hmm.
and watch TV or whatever. I don't ever remember a time that she watched a television show from beginning to end,
Yeah.
sitting in front of the TV watching it, she would uh she'd come in, whoever else was watching it, she would ask them what was going on. It was really annoying.
Yeah.
She would ask them what was going on. She would leave. And, this is before VCRs and all of that. She would leave. She'd go about and do her busy things. And she'd come back and she'd ask what had happened while she was gone, which you would explain and then lose part of the show, right?
Yeah.
So that was my mom with the TV. She was never going to sit and watch it. And then she still saw herself as a professional woman when she went into the facility. She still had that notion that she was a professional and that she had students to see and clients to see and customers to see and so on. So she was not the sit and chill out or sit and watch TV. So she tried to talk to the professionals, which she saw herself as being.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and who were those? Those were the nurses,
Mm-hmm.
right? She'd try and
Mm-hmm.
talk to the nurses. Didn't want to talk to the aides. They weren't. My
They weren't
mother was.
professional.
My mother was a snob.
Yeah.
Um, a lovely snob who loved me, but she was a snob.
Mm-hmm.
And she she would try and chat up the nurses, and they hadn't the time for her.
Yeah.
And then she was also agitated, which is a phase some of your listeners may be aware of, but it is a phase that some people go through when they have Alzheimer's. And she went through it, and she went through it rocking hard.
Mm.
Angry about everything, obstinate, which she was this way in real
Yeah.
life. Like,
Yeah.
she had a very strong personality, but this was over the top.
Sure.
And so they couldn't contain her. And then they asked me if she were to have a phone, if she were in her room at the facility. And I said no, that I didn't think that was a good idea, because she did what we referred to as dialing for dollars when she was home. She would get the phone, and she would just dial random numbers and try to talk to people.
Just to
Um,
talk. Yeah.
and then she would try to talk to people, and then it got worse. She would tell people that there was a strange man in her home and that they needed to call the police for her. And that would have been her second husband,
Yeah.
who she was living with. And um, that became a problem. The police at the door, the whole business. But she wanted her phone, darn it. And she discovered that other people had phones in their rooms. So
Mm-hmm.
she would go bustling into a room and make phone calls.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
So she wasn't allowing other residents their privacy. She got angry with them. She would go out in the gardens at night or early morning. She wouldn't be fully dressed when she did that, and they couldn't contain her.
Yeah.
She didn't want to help. She didn't want help showering, any of that kind of stuff. And that was the beginning of, we think we need to medicate your mother. Do you mind if we have a psychiatrist take a look at her? No, I didn't mind. If they could calm that down,
Yeah.
I was fine with that. I didn't want her, to be drooling in a corner somewhere.
Uh-huh.
But if she could be less angry and maybe just enjoy her surroundings a little bit, the gardens in the place were just lovely. So they asked if she could see the psychiatrist. She saw the psychiatrist. They gave her medication. It didn't work, but they didn't give it any time to work. They gave it a few days and then told me it wasn't working, and could she see the psychiatrist again? And so we get up to really the crisis portion of this, when she went out into the gardens one morning. It was December, just before she was going to come home for her first visit home. She went out into the gardens in her pajamas and her bare feet, which we had done many, many times at home, because we enjoyed the snow and the flowers, and what was left of the flowers and the snow outlining the trees and so on and so forth. So she did that morning in a light snowfall, and they went after her and told her that she had to come back in. And she told them she was going to climb the wall and she wasn't going to come back in. And she stood her ground, and she, arms akimbo, the whole business, said, I'm not doing this, and stamped her feet and all of that. So they brought her in and they dispatched her to a psychiatric hospital,
Hmm.
a psychiatric Alzheimer's
Yeah.
unit.
Yeah. Yeah. And so how long was she there? Did she remain there for
She remained there for the rest of her life. Yes.
and,
So she
yeah.
was in the original place beginning in October. And in December, they moved her to the
Yeah.
psychiatric facility. And then she was there until she died in June.
And your book is written uniquely by months, which is a unique way of writing that I found. So your mom was a strong-willed person. Tell us just a little bit more about her. What did she do in her vibrant life, the best of times for her? What did she do? Strong-willed person, professional. Tell us a little bit more about your mom. I'd like to
She was
get to
a
know her.
teacher for years and years and years. Loved it, loved teaching. And after becoming a teacher, she was a reading teacher, and she was a guidance counselor, and then she was a school psychologist, and that's what she retired from
Yeah.
in the end. And then all along while she was doing that, she belonged to her local garden club, and she just loved flowers. She had loved flowers her whole life, and she opened a floral business to some reasonable local success.
Yeah.
um, and had fun with that, did that all of her retirement until she couldn't, until the executive function, the planning and organizing wasn't there for her to be able to do it.
Was too much. So she loved flowers long before she imagined seeing flowers, right?
Absolutely.
Isn't that interesting? Well, the title of your book is Who Will Name the Bees? And I think it's both tender and it's haunting a bit for me. But what inspired it? And what does naming the bees come to symbolize as memory and identity as they begin to disappear? What does that? What did it mean?
It's so interesting to hear you say that, because it's there, everyone who reads it, it means something different to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
um and I kind of anticipated this question about the title and why it was what it is. And if I tell you, then you will lose a good portion of the end of the story.
Okay.
So um I'm not, yeah, if you don't mind, I'd
No,
prefer
no, no.
not to say that, but it is, I will be asking when I do book talks and so on. I have a book that has bees in it, and I will be asking people who attend to put names down for the bees if they would like to do that,
Okay.
which I think will contribute to the enormity of the notion of a beehive.
Yeah. Understood. Well, talk to us a little bit because I know many of our listeners are caring for spouses, siblings, or parents with Alzheimer's or dementia. What is something that you wish families understood earlier before the disease progresses?
That by the time most of us get help, it's too late to really do the good we could have done prior. My mother was absolutely just absolutely devoted to the notion that my grandmother needed her independence for as long as she possibly
Mm-hmm.
could. By the time my grandmother was placed in a nursing home, a then nursing home, she couldn't hold on a conversation. She didn't remember to turn off the water in the sink. She didn't remember where the toilet was. She didn't remember that she had been wearing the same clothes for weeks on end. She didn't remember where her bedroom was, and on and on and on. And my grandmother should have had help before that, but my mother wanted to help her maintain her independence.
Yeah.
So my mother would go over there. She only lived about 10 minutes from my parents' home. Um, my mother would go over there twice a day and make sure that she took her medications and make sure that she had something to eat and so on and so forth. But she forgot to do that. My mom would sit with her sometimes to get her to eat, and she'd say, "Oh, I'll eat it later," or whatever.
Yeah.
And then, so that was my blueprint for what to do with my mom.
Mm-hmm.
My
Mm-hmm.
mom wanted to keep her mother's independence for as long as possible. So that's what I was supposed to do too. And I didn't get her the help that she needed early enough. That said, she would have fought me so hard on it. I'm not sure I would have been successful.
Yeah.
And her husband at the time was not helpful. He was in a lot of denial, didn't really want to deal with it at all.
Yes.
So my hands were kind of tied because he was her husband.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Um, so how did you navigate the decision to place your mother in a memory care unit? How did you do that? Did you have help of, about your family? Did you have brothers, sisters, your husband you mentioned? Tell us how you came about to navigate that whole thing.
The There's a section in the book where I talk about my mother having breast cancer and recovering from
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
And in that process, she really couldn't care for herself. And that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, made me see really how much she wasn't doing for herself. She wasn't taking medication that she was supposed to be taking. She took blood pressure medications. She wasn't taking that. They had put her on Aricept, the drug that's supposed to help you delay or stall
Yeah.
Alzheimer's, and so on. She wasn't taking that. Her husband wasn't helping her to do that. I don't think it even occurred to him that he needed to. She covered and covered and covered. I know now that she knew something was wrong.
Yeah.
And that whole situation where she was recovering from breast surgery and ended up with infected wounds, because she wasn't getting the care that she needed, was the catalyst. And that's when I began looking
Yeah. And
and began talking about it more. And I talked to my husband about it, and we'd talk about it, and then it would go. We would let it go. And then we'd talk about it again when she would do something, not right. And on and on. At one point, she left her home and walked down a secondary highway, um, just looking for my dad.
yeah. Yeah. So, your family, for those that haven't read the book, and they haven't, because I was fortunate enough that you gave me um, a pre-publishing version of your book, and thank you for that. So I was able to read it. But what other family is it? Just you, Sarah?
Yeah, Jim, I hear people talk about this all the time, that they have parents that they need to do to help to get placed or whatever, and they end up fighting with siblings. And everyone told me how I'm an only child. Everyone told me how lucky I was that I was an only child, because I didn't have to argue with anybody about what should happen with my mom.
Mm-hmm.
It's also very lonely,
Yeah.
very lonely. And my husband helped. He certainly did. He was there every step of the way. My kids were a little too young to be a support. They were wrapped up in the sadness of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I did it. I did it myself. My best friend, my bestie, she heard many a story. She helped with, lots of my crying and sadness about the whole thing, and helped me to see, like my husband, to see the reality of it and to make decisions that were appropriate for my
Yeah.
mom. And
Yeah.
she's the closest I have to a sibling. Um, she has been around since we were 6 and 7 years old. Um, so pretty close to uh, to having a sibling, and obviously knew my mom.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the whole thing was about keeping her safe and as happy as possible. Of course, she wasn't happy when she was first placed and angry and so on and so forth. But
Yeah.
the safety became a true issue
Yeah.
very quickly.
Well, and I think and you kind of reflected on it. You're very fortunate to have a husband who supported you in this whole journey, because it's a tough one for anyone. Um, so how being the grief that you've gone through, um, how did you deal with the grief of someone that you lost? You actually lost her before you lost her. It's double loss. It's a unique situation. How did you personally cope with the loss of your mother's recognition, even while she was still alive? And then once your mother passed, how did you deal with that? How have you dealt with that as well? And I hope
I
that's not too
didn't.
hard.
No, it's not. I
Okay.
didn't. I didn't deal with it while it was happening. I put one foot in front of the other and focused on her being safe and happy, and kept my focus there. Allowed myself very few tears, only with Brody and my bestie, and I just did what had to be done
Yeah.
to, make the decisions and so on. And it wasn't until, and my mother and I had a rocky relationship probably most of my life, but from reading the book that there were two things that were always safe for us, and that was gardening and music. And so in her later years, I just stuck to that with
Mm-hmm.
her.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, mostly that was gone too, although she could still sing, and hold her part,
Uh-huh.
which was amazing to me.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so it wasn't until afterwards, those screaming moments in the middle of the night where I'd wake up and I would have a memory. And my husband actually got me a piece of glass to go on top of my night table. And I'd have a Sharpie on the night table, and I would take the Sharpie and I would write down a couple of notes, and then so that I had the ideas down and they didn't keep me awake. And then I would write them come morning, or, whenever I was able to sit and write them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it didn't come right away. It was not reconciled right away. When she died, when she actually physically died, um, it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks that it was never going to get better. The relationship was never going to get better, and she was never going to get better. And somewhere in the back of my brain, I knew that, but I could not face it until it was over.
Mm. Yeah. And, not to give anything away, but her passing wasn't exactly a calm and wonderful moment for you, right? And people will understand that when they read the book. It wasn't what you hope for. I know when my mother passed, I was with her till the very end. I was able to hold her hand. I was able to, in my own way, release her to heaven, release her in a way. So I was there. You didn't have that luxury, and that's got to be tough as well. But as both a psychologist and a daughter, how did your professional knowledge, being a psychologist, how did that help or hinder matters?
It it didn't help at all. I was going through it as a daughter, and not a professional, and it did not help.
Yeah, well, and I've heard that, doctors, for example, medical doctors are some of the worst patients ever, so you think they could cope with things and they could take it all and handle it. But uh, Apparently,
I had a professor who, and I've quoted him many, many times over the years, who used to say parenting is an amateur sport.
yeah,
Um, I think um, being a child in this kind of situation is an amateur sport. It doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter how much you've researched everything that you're coming up against. There's some of it that's just going to hit you.
yeah, yeah. When you're writing in the book, and your writing is obviously you write very honestly about very painful topics, you know, breast cancer, vulnerability, and even possible abuse. And you write it without sensationalism. But how did you balance, or how did you balance truth telling with compassion, especially when writing about someone um, who could no longer speak for herself? How did you do that? How were you able to truth tell with compassion?
I wrote it first with all of the anger included,
Yeah.
all of the anger and the frustration, and I let it sit.
Oh,
And then I guess if there were something professional that came in, that would be where it came in. And I recognized that my anger was not just like we started talking about the facility.
yeah.
They weren't mean to her. They
Yeah.
didn't not care. They couldn't provide her what I romantically wanted to be provided for her.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I had to look at my words and be very careful about what I said because there in many instances I don't think there was any attempt to harm.
Yeah. Um, yeah. It's such an interesting story, and um, so it's just you. It's just Brody, your husband, and your friend that was doing this, that was helping her. Um, Talk about a little bit about. Um, I'm not even sure how to ask it. Let me ask first. How long did it take you to write the book? Because you said you put it down, right? And I've written a book. I know how that works. Took me 10 years to get through mine. And talk about that journey.
Um, First of all, my so much credit goes to my editors, Marnie Friedman and Tracy Jean Jones, who helped me through this process uh, in 5 pages at a time. So I decided as I was getting ready to retire to join San Diego Writers Inc.
Okay.
And I took a class with Marnie and Tracy, and it was on memoir writing. And I had already written down a few of the things that had ended up on the glass night table, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I went to class, I heard what other people wrote, I kind of got an idea for what I wanted to do. Everything I did in my book is wrong. There are supposed to be no flashbacks. Readers supposedly don't like that. So there's no flashbacks. There's no what the way mine is written is you talked about it month by month, and that
Yes.
would be considered beads on a string, also a no-no. So I did all these things in there that you weren't supposed to do. But they stuck with me while I did that, and we would have assignments every week. Come on Saturday to class and have written about thus and such. And I would say, oh, well, I've already written about that. I already wrote it on the night table. I'm going to write this up and bring it. And so I did that. Um, and in that process, I realized that I had something. Like I remember sitting, and I'm sure Brody remembers sitting too, me sitting there too, on the living room floor, putting out, we only brought 5 pages at a time on Saturday mornings because it was a read and critique kind of a situation. So everyone had a chance to read. So you couldn't bring 50 pages to read, right?
Yeah, that was the assignment. So you followed
Right. So I followed the assignment for probably the first time in my life. But anyway, not being neither here nor there. Um, so I sat on the living room floor and I started putting the pieces in order. And I realized that I had something. And then I realized that there was a backstory, because everything that I was writing was, most of what I was writing was the stuff that had happened in that time in the aughts when she was placed in memory care until she died.
yeah.
Um, so it was then that I came up with the notion of doing the flashbacks and other periods of time during those times of year. And then just, I, both my editors and my fellow read and critiquers, we refer to ourselves as the Righteous Sisters. Um,
Well, that's a good title.
yeah,
Yeah.
not mine. Someone else came up with it, but it's a good one. Um, it, I began to develop a real compassion and respect for my mother that I didn't necessarily have as a younger person. And it was through them, their lens, that I was able to kind of augment the compassion and respect that I had for her.
Yeah, because you didn't have your relationship with your mom wasn't exactly, as I recall, warm and fuzzy. It
No,
wasn't a
it was
warm.
not at all. She
Oh,
was not a warm mother.
yeah. Um,
She was warm
so
to everyone else, but not necessarily to me.
isn't that funny? Not funny, but isn't that odd? But I don't think it's unusual. I just perhaps she just couldn't. It,
Well, and it's all the events of my life, and many of the ones that I talk about in there are so reframed in my memory now
mhm.
around respect and compassion for who she was and how difficult it was for her to do that.
Yeah,
Um, it wasn't for a lack of love. She
yeah.
loved me.
So did writing this memoir, did reviewing all of that, really studying your relationship with your mother that you hadn't done before? I mean, how many of us really sit down and write our memories? We usually lose them before we write them down. But how did writing the memoir change how you saw your mother or yourself? How did writing this really change how you saw your mother, and did it? And then you too. How did it
So
change?
it really it changed my notions of her behavior and how she raised me and what she taught me and how she did it and how measured it really was over the years. I didn't My mom must have thought an awful lot about raising a child, which I never imagined
Yeah.
that she did. So there was that. Um and I forgot the second half of your question, so I can't answer it.
Yeah. Well, how did the memoir change you? How did writing this change you, or how did you see yourself? Because it's basically you were examining yourself throughout this.
Mhm.
Um, the book is very honest. You lay it all out there. How did it change how you see yourself?
My mother used to say to me, um, when I frustrated her, she would say to me, "How come you inherited all of my bad habits and none of my good ones?" And now I consider that a compliment,
Oh man.
because a lot of who I am, my determination, I'm not going to cry again, my determination, um, my get up and go ness, my desire to do things, and my what is it? P word, procrastinating. My mother's
Yes.
a major procrastinator, and so am I. Um, all of those things, I realized how much I am like her and how much I'm not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And interestingly enough, if you had asked me when I were younger, which parent I liked the best,
Mm.
I would have chosen my father.
Mm.
Um, and it's not that I like my mother the best, but there's way more stories
Yeah.
about her than there are about him.
Well,
So
so
a,
you connected more with your father than your mother, is what you're
I
saying,
did
right?
growing up, but now I feel like I'm more connected with my mother. And that would be the major change, is that I recognize myself, I recognize her in me.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Do you think that discovery came with writing this? That you wouldn't, you,
largely, yes, largely, yes. Mhm.
yeah. So let's
I
talk.
didn't want to be like her. I didn't, all growing up, I didn't want to be like her. I didn't
Yeah.
just, yeah,
But,
yeah.
but going through this, I think well, obviously you understand her more than you ever did before, right? Um, your book is filled with poetry, with beautiful poetry, which is a passion of yours, obviously. Talk about your poetry and why you decided to integrate it into your book. And I also want to know, I don't want to throw too many questions in one question, but when did you write the poetry? Is it poetry that you had written before? Is it poetry that you discovered while you were writing this book? Talk about your poetry, because it's beautiful and it's a wonderful piece of your book.
Thank you. Um, I have always loved poetry. Got to drink. You can't drink and cry at the same time, by the way.
they they say that, yeah. Well, and but if you smile, you can't cry either. So just start
Oh, is that true?
smiling.
So I'll
Yeah,
keep
just start
smiling.
smiling. It's going to
All
be
right.
really weird. People are going to wonder what's wrong with her. But yeah,
So, my mom and I used to talk about poetry all the time. And when I learned literary, what do you call them? Literary devices. When
hmm
I
hmm
learned literary devices in school, I used to talk to her about them, like foreshadowing. And I'd say to her, of course, she's a psychologist, right? And I would say to her, Mom, is the foreshadowing in the story or the foreshadowing in the poem, is that intentional or not? And we would go back and forth about whether or not it was and all of that. And my very earliest memories are of her singing to me and reading me poetry. She read me all kinds of poetry, and so many times that I can still recite much of it now,
wow,
and recited it to my children when they were young. Um, so poetry is near and dear to my heart. I started writing it when I was in fourth grade.
okay,
Um, and I wrote it for a class assignment, again, an assignment, um, and left, like, didn't do it after, high school and college and stuff. I didn't do it. And then all of a sudden it started coming like the essays. And it came faster. I remember calling my husband in the car on my way to work or whatever, and I would say, just write down these words
wow,
because I don't want to forget them. And it perfectly describes what I want. And it ended up in the stories, it ended up between the stories because I felt it gave a color snapshot of things about my mother and my relationship with her,
yeah, yeah,
much more so than I felt the prose can do. And I feel that way about poetry many times anyway. E. E. Cummings, William Carlos Williams, Emily Dickinson, all huge influences on me. Um, yeah,
well,
so it was very, very important, and it sort of came pouring forth. And since then, I have continued to write poetry, not necessarily about my mother.
yeah.
And I will continue to do it. It is very, very satisfying.
Isn't it funny that so many people, unless they go on from high school and study something in particular in college, that things like music, things like poetry, things like writing get left behind because we all become so busy with other things. Um, and it's wonderful that you found it again, that you were able to discover it again and still use it. Um, Tell me, what would you hope those uh, those who read your book, what would you hope that they get from the book?
That they're not alone. I felt so terribly alone for so much of the time that I was going through this. As I mentioned before, even though I had Brody and my bestie,
Yeah.
um, I just felt so alone with my relationship with my mother and all of that. That I wanted people to not feel alone. I wanted them to know that there were hard memories and good memories and all of that, and it's all mixed up and it all goes together. And then, smiling again, I want people to be at peace with their own decisions. I made the best decision, just like parenting. I
Yeah.
made the best decisions I could at the time with the information I had. And while I had the woulda, shoulda, couldas,
Hmm.
I wish I had done it this way or I wish I had done it that way. I couldn't have at the time. And I've reconciled that. And I hope it helps someone else reconcile it earlier.
And I think it will. I definitely think it will, Sarah. One question that I always ask in the conversations I have with the guests that I'm fortunate enough to talk to is there has to be a question that I should have asked, but I didn't. If there's something I didn't ask, but you think I should have, what would that question be? What should I have asked you that I didn't, Sarah?
That's a tough one.
It,
That
it,
that's that's really tough. I think it might be about living memory, and that memory, how memory keeps going and how those stories going forward are so important.
yeah.
Um, yeah, legacy, maybe something about legacy.
Mm,
Um,
yeah. Well,
I do see my mother in both of my daughters, um, which at times I want to say to them,
uh,
why did you inherit her bad habits and not her good ones? But they
it goes around,
inherited,
doesn't it?
so
Yeah.
it does, it goes right around. But they inherited many wonderful things from her. So
Well, and they're all unique to your family. They're all special, even the strange and not so inspiring ones. They're all special. And Sarah, I want to tell you, I look forward to your book coming out on April 22nd. I encourage those that are listening to this to look for it and to put it on their calendar. It'll be on Amazon, I presume. It'll be
it
easily.
will. And I have a website also,
Oh, sure.
sarahvosberg.com.
Okay. Um, Spell it out, please, because it isn't Vosberg. I spell your
It's
name out correctly.
Sarah, so it's Sarah with an H, no
Yeah.
space, no dot, Vosburgh.com.
Okay. And so you can go to her site right now. I'm not even sure that I have it. I do have it queued up. So you can see her site and you can go there. Please go there. Because Sarah is not a first timer. I mean, she's written other things and she's done a lot of other things as well. And so go to her site. I think you'll discover even more about Sarah and I invite you to do that. Sarah, I want to thank you for being with me. I think our podcast may help somebody who is in the same place that you were and are. And it's always good to talk about this kind of thing rather than keeping it in. And you did a beautiful job in your book. Thank you so much for writing it.
Well, thank you, Jim. You've been a most gracious host. It's been an honor to be here. Thank you for your listening and your listeners listening and your time.
You bet. You
Appreciate
bet.
it.
Well, I hope we can talk again. And everybody, thank you so much. Um, if you have any questions, make sure you reach out to Sarah or reach out to me. And I appreciate you listening to Senior to Seniors. Please tell your friends about this episode. It may be helpful to them. It may help somebody, and as it probably will help you when you read it. And again, thank you, Sarah. Thank you to my listeners. And thank you for listening to Senior to Seniors. Have a great day. To everyone listening today, many of you are walking this road that Sarah walked right now. And some of you are caregivers, some of you are grieving, some of you are quietly wondering what will be remembered when your own memories begin to thin. What Sarah reminded us of today and in her book is even when names fade, connection can remain. Even when stories fracture, love can still be spoken. Even when memory fails, meaning does not have to. Who will name the bees is not just a title, it's a call, and you'll find that when you read the book. It's a reminder that stories untold are stories lost, that love unspoken is love assumed, that forgiveness delayed can become regret carried. If today stirred something in you, have the conversation, tell the story, write the letter, ask the question. Because memory is fragile, as you've heard today, but presence is powerful. And sometimes the greatest gift we can give is simply to witness a life fully, even when it's fading. Again, thank you everybody so much for listening today. Have a great day.